Hey, welcome to our presentation, Don't Just Survive Compliance Audits, ASIM. In today's presentation, we're going to be covering why compliance matters to businesses of all sizes at all stages. We're going to be covering the most common compliance standards out there that we all face, the challenges we face in trying to collect the evidence and provide that evidence for our auditors, how Mondoo helps our customers achieve continuous compliance. And at the end of all this, we're going to give you a little sneak peek into some of the new features and functionality we have coming to the platform. Before we do that, let's start with some introductions.
Hey, everybody, I'm Daniel Mardashev. I'm a sales engineering leader here at Mondoo. I've been working in cybersecurity for quite a few years now, and I recently joined to really tackle some of these challenges and problems that Scott's already touched on in the compliance space. So excited to dive into this with you today.
Yeah, and I'm Scott Ford. I'm principal architect here at Mondo. I've been with the company since its founding, so about 2.5 years now. My background is all in large scale automation, specifically focused on security automation and security engineering. And something I like to point out to people when talking about Mondo and our background here is while we're new to market, this team, including Daniel and myself, we've all been working together for about a decade now on large scale automation with some of the largest, most iconic companies in the world. And it's really helped us inform the product that we're building today. So we're really excited to dive in and show you that. And we can't make any assumptions any of you are familiar with Mondoo. So probably a good place to start off is just with an overview of the platform and the problems that we're solving today for our customers.
Yes, let's dive in. Mondoo was built from the bottom up to be a security and compliance platform. You'll kind of get a sense right off the bat of what makes Mondoo special is that you can see here probably a decent selection of services and systems you're responsible for today. So Mondoo is actually integrating with and answering security and, very importantly, compliance questions about all of these disparate services that we're responsible for. Now, in the case of how we built the platform, we really wanted to address sort of three primary pillars here. One, asset inventorying or asset management. So if I look at, for instance, my environment, I have a very large collection of different types of assets I'm responsible for. And the adage goes, right, if you can't see it, how do you secure it? So if I drill into a specific asset type like AWS, what you can see here are the different logical groupings of AWS assets you have out there, from your EC2 instances all the way down to IAM groups and EC2 volumes, et cetera. If I drill into EC2 instances as a common example, we sort of move straight forward into our next pillar that we're working to address here, which is risk management. So now that I know what's out there, I want to be able to drill in and take a look at what's happening with my specific assets that are important to me. So in this case, I have a Red Hat instance, and I want to understand from a risk management perspective, how do I benchmark this system and hunt for misconfigurations? And how do I also manage any vulnerabilities that have sort of affected this system? This overview page is giving us a quick sort of high level view of some of these factors at play. But if I drill into this policies view, I can see the different types of CIS benchmark policies that have actually been, in some cases, automatically assigned to this system. What's happening here is Mondoo is a CIS certified partner, and we've taken the benchmarks that they've produced, we've captured them in what we call policy as code. This is something our founders had spearheaded probably starting 10 years ago now. It's been a while, but with those benchmarks captured, we're able to apply them against the system and check them for best practices or particular levels of benchmarking that we want to achieve. The types of checks that we're performing are best practice checks, they're security checks, you name it. It's sort of a full gamut of the different types of drill-in checks you can perform here. At the same time, though, we're managing risk here, right? So we need to understand what level of vulnerability we're also experiencing. So this is a vulnerable packages oriented view where I have OpenSSL, libraries and application that's currently experiencing some pretty serious vulnerabilities amongst others. I can also do a CVE or advisory centric view here as well. The point, though, is that this view gives you a pretty holistic understanding of the types of risks that you need to manage against this system and, of course, across all the other systems we sort of looked at pretty quickly earlier. By the way, this view is real time and it's performed continuously. So you can have a very powerful understanding of what's going on and what I like to think of as the shop floor within your runtime, what's happening out there. And by the way, you can also achieve this level of understanding even during your release process, during your build and release phase of what you're producing. So very holistic end-to-end view of what you're looking at here is achievable with Mondoo. But how do we put this data to work? Like, what are we ultimately trying to achieve here? Well, some of the challenges we face around compliance are pretty serious and painful today. Technical evidence gathering, as an example, is a huge pain point that that all of us, one way or another, are having to deal with from a cybersecurity perspective. So this view I'm showing you here, this is called the Compliance Hub. What we've done here is we've taken some of the more common compliance frameworks that are out there, and we've mapped them in and turned these into an out-of-the-box offering. So we have our SOC 2 checks here that we're performing, our CSA Cloud Controls Matrix, ISO 27001, SOC 2's cooler European cousin, if you will, or international cousin, and then PCI DSS, all the way down to the support for custom frameworks. So we can actually even support, customized frameworks out there for organizations that need that. So what you're looking at here is the ability, when I drill in, for instance, into the SOC 2 standard, is the ability to understand, okay, what are some of the common criteria that I'm being measured against? Which, all those benchmarks I showed you earlier, those policies, well, all those policies, they can now be put to work in service of our compliance program. So those same policies, those same checks, they actually perform a really powerful service for us here by collecting the evidence we need for our next audit. So what's going on is Mondoo is checking your systems for misconfigurations, sure, but it's also producing evidence so you can pass, or as we're putting it here, right, you can ace your next audit. So these benchmarks are a really important aspect of that process. And then again, with what makes Mondoo special here, we're able to do this across a heterogeneous set of systems and services. So these checks, this is a really important concept, because when we perform these checks, SOC 2 looks at your environment and really thinks a lot about scoping assets in and out. And PCI is much the same way. You have some assets that are scoped in for PCI compliance and the rest that are not. But the thing is that scoping isn't just across cloud, workloads. It's not just across your SaaS environments, it's across everything. So these scoping requirements are going to touch effectively a little bit of everything in your environment and everything you're responsible for. And that's what we've worked to solve here as a result, is to really come at this problem space in a way that collect that evidence, nail some of these problems, without having to, forcing you to pick up 2-3 tools and stack them together and start to do interesting downstream reporting, which a lot of us do today. And it's very, very painful. By the way, if you want to get hands-on before we get into the rest of the content here together, you can do so. Just go on, hop onto console.mondoo.com/sign up, create an account, and everything that you saw there that I just walked through, you can see for yourself. Actually, that functionality is out of the box, and take a look at what Mondoo can do for you.
Okay, so now that we have a better idea of what Mondoo is and the problems we're trying to solve, let's dive into a little bit behind the why. Why does compliance matter? Why is it that we're trying to achieve compliance? Well, it's an easy one to answer. It's because of security, right? We're trying to be SOC 2 compliant because we're going to be more secure. I think, in a perfect world, yes. But really what we're seeing out there across the board is it's really not security is what's driving us to be compliant, but it's more of a business requirement that's driving us to be compliant. Let me see if I step back from this. The top priority for any company out there is pretty simple one. It's to grow the business, right? We want to bring on more customers. We want to grow the revenue of the business. And what we see out there is as more and more businesses become, say, SOC 2 Type 2 compliant, they are looking to do business with other businesses that are also putting these security best practices in place. So, you can't, a prospect may come to you and they can't use your product unless you are SOC 2 Type 2 compliant. And so really what this comes down to from a business problem is unlocking revenue. This is something from the CEO on down. Everybody should be able to understand, like, we're all trying to grow our businesses out here. If you want to bring on that new customer and grow the business, and you have to be SOC 2 Type 2 compliant to do that, then we're going to get behind getting that certification. And this problem isn't something that's just for the biggest businesses out there. It's really for businesses of all size, from a 50-year-old business all the way down to a business that's less than a year old. If you need to be SOC 2 compliant to bring on a customer, then you're going to prioritize that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, Mondoo as a company, we're young, and this year alone, we've already tackled our SOC 2 Type 1. So we've been formally audited and certified. We've tackled SOC 2 Type 2, also formally audited and recognized and certified. And all of that has even been a dress rehearsal for achieving ISO 27001 here in a hot minute. And the reason why is because we're working and operating in the US. We're also working and operating within Europe, and we want the international standards as well. That certification under our belt. And the reason why is we as businesses, our customers in turn, we're all holding each other accountable now. So businesses are holding each other accountable here to have achieved some base level of security competence, right? A way to measure that dispassionately, if you will. But ultimately, this is no longer a big company problem. So we, even as a small organization, we've had to tackle this, and no doubt some of the people who are joining us on the call today are also tackling this, right?
All right, so we've mentioned a few frameworks already. We've talked about SOC 2, we've talked about ISO, but there's a lot of other compliance standards out there that we're covering inside a Mondoo platform and seeing across all of our customer base. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of those other frameworks that we're trying to achieve.
Yes. So let's dive in. Here are the more common frameworks that are out there. Definitely not an exhaustive list. This is a little bit of the who's who in the zoo of what we're all facing, right? And no doubt you're seeing some of the standards that apply to you today, or will probably apply to you tomorrow. Maybe the business has threatened you with a future HIPAA initiative or something like that. So you're looking at different types of standards here, right? Each of these frameworks sort of have a different driving force. For example, HIPAA focuses in on, of course, securing health data. ISO and SOC 2, right, are looking at cybersecurity in your organization. ISO actually has an interesting angle of continuous improvement as well. So every year you're actually meant to show continuous improvement with ISO 27001. So definitely an interesting animal. But actually not to be forgotten. So since we operate in Europe, we also actually think a lot about the European standards that are out there. There's the BSI German standard, the bottom left, the NIS2 directive that's coming into play very shortly here. And then, of course, CSA, I think everyone's pretty well familiar with or aware of some of the Cloud Security Alliance work happening out there. Now, when we think about these frameworks, though, even though some of them have these different driving forces, they are all connected in one way. The way that we like to look at this, and it's sort of an old adage, actually, the notion of people, process, and technology, right? All of these standards, they all treat people, process, and technology at some level. They address it at some level, and there are definitely some solutions out there that focus heavily on the people and process portion, right? Producing policies, running risk registers, et cetera. And within the GRC space, the GRC tool space, if you will, so that's governance, risk, compliance space, there are some pretty solid offerings out there from, let's say, Archer, OneTrust, Vanta, or Drata that really dive into the people process side of things. But where we all still experience ongoing challenges and pain today really is around the technology element, right? Where these offerings and others in the industry have actually failed us. So the technology element is really a big problem to solve. And for the purposes of our time here, by the way, technology, we're defining that, right, as cybersecurity controls that you have to put in place. And then you in turn need to audit and confirm those controls on a regular cycle so that means that in your next audit, when you audit those controls, your findings serve as the evidence that your auditor needs, right? So the findings of those checks produce the evidence you need for your auditor. And the thing is, though, auditing and collecting evidence against your systems is really challenging. Like, we've all experienced this. You have to do this for your complete organization. PCI or HIPAA or SOC 2, the way they scope systems in, the way they treat your environment and those services is going to touch a little bit of everything in some respects, right? So in our case, heck, even when Mondoo was certifying against SOC 2 Type 2, our identity management system was scoped in. So that was a SaaS service, right? Versus our cloud workload. So there's a real cherry picking element here of scoping that we all have to think about and address. The categories the industry has produced in this case, though, there's like a cloud sort of category, right? So your cloud system services, et cetera. There's your endpoints like laptops, desktops, your SaaS services themselves. Heck, even IoT devices. We work with an organization that has IoT device requirements as well that are absolutely considered in scope. Not to be forgotten, though, you might be kind of watching this webinar and thinking, hey, hold on a second. We haven't gone and chased down a formal compliance regime yet. But we're getting there, right? We're striving to line things up for a future audit. Totally get where you're coming from, because we work with an organization today that's lining up to tackle their SOC 2 Type 1 and Type 2, like in short order. In order to achieve that, though, they want to get their posture right, so to speak. They want to kind of set themselves up for success by aligning to an existing standard within the NIST framework. So they're going to use one of the NIST standards to effectively get themselves an easier SOC 2 Type 1 and Type 2 audit, a sort of achievement, if you will. Okay. Anyway, now that we understand the general makeup of the compliance frameworks, right? People, process, technology, and where we're seeing a ton of pain, technology. What are some of the really big challenges around that? Like, let's dive into that next.
Yeah, and there are definitely a lot of challenges when it comes to audits. I mean, the first thing to think about when you're in audit season, like it's an exercise of running around with your hair on fire and trying to collect the information that you need. I certainly have been a part of audits in the past. I remember the days as before, configuration management stuff, a lot of the automation that we do today of like manually logging into systems and collecting that data and putting it into a spreadsheet and emailing it around. Now, we work with a compliance officer who works with a lot of different customers out there, and asked him recently what he's seen out there as far as compliance tooling. And number one is nothing at all. Second is spreadsheets. So it's still, we know that a lot of people, this is very, very manual. But another big challenge, one of the big challenges we see out there is a problem that we've highlighted before, which comes down to accountability and responsibility. So if you think about an audit achieving SOC 2 compliance or ISO, whatever it is, if you're lucky, you've got a GRC team in-house, and that's what they do all day, and they own that from end to end. But if you're a small shop, this may come down to your head of engineering and operations to go through and prove all of the various systems that are in scope inside your environment. But what happens very often, though, is you've got a team that's accountable for the whole audit process, and they have to then go out to each of the various teams to collect the data they need. So, you may have the platform engineering team is responsible for the cloud environments, but then you've got IT is responsible for the laptops and for the SaaS products that are out there. So, each one of these is a different exercise of like, this is the data I need, what form is that data, and it come back in, and it quickly starts to balloon out of control. And, these audits that we're talking about too, is they're not just like a one and done. SOC 2 is annual. ISO is annual, not just annual, as Daniel touched on earlier. It's that we're also trying to prove out that we're continuously improving upon these compliance standards that we're all adhere to. So, big challenges come down to what's the infrastructure that's in scope, who do I need to ask to get that information, and then also when I'm doing that, I'm interrupting real work that's going on inside the environment. So if we're focusing on asking these questions of our various teams to give us information, you know what they're not doing? They're not shipping new features and functionality that provide actual value for our customers and the products that we're building. So
yeah, I mean, Scott, you make such a good point there, because one of the organizations we're working with, I know you're definitely familiar with, right? They have this every year on their audit season now. And the challenge they're facing is that 40% of their sprint cycle just gets absolutely eaten up. So they have like a 2 to 4 week sprint cycle here, or two of them really, that just get eaten up during the audit season that's nigh at that point. So for about a month, 40% of their engineers are not shipping, customer focused feature sets. They're addressing a really important activity, but they're tied up. Now they have in mind a second standard that the business is actually pushing, that the organization tackles a second standard. So now they're going to have 2 of these sort of audit seasons a year. And then what happens when there's a third added later? So this is a serious impact, right, around these sort of the challenges we're looking at here and around evidence gathering, right?
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. We see this everywhere, and to double click even just a little bit further into this one is you take a single control out there, like a common one that we see across the various frameworks is improving encryption. Proving that you have encryption configured, encryption at rest. So back to the idea of what's in scope. Well, here at Mondoo, we run our production environment in GCP. We also have a production environment in AWS. In that, you have to answer the questions. Well, what services are you running inside of those cloud environments? Which of those services have encryption? How do you prove whether or not you actually have that configuration in place? But it's not just into the cloud environments. Mondoo, for instance, is a remote by default company, which means that all of our laptops are in scope. So I'm on Mac OS, Daniel's on Mac OS. That's File Vault. Do you have File Vault turned on? We have people that are on Windows. Windows is BitLocker. We have developers that prefer to use Linux, and we don't force them to use a specific distribution. They can use whatever they want. So what distribution are you using? What encryption are you using on the laptop? So like very quickly, you can see this balloons into a massive problem that while, it certainly is helping you to unlock that revenue to the business, you can go to sell new customers, but it also interrupts that productivity that we have out there. So we touched on the product earlier today, earlier in the webinar on what were a high level overview, but I think now is a perfect example for Daniel's going to dive in and show us exactly how that workflow works around collecting evidence and providing that for our auditors.
All right, exactly. Let's dive back into the Mondoo console. I'm going to take us back to where we started earlier as well. This is that main assets page view where I can see all of the different services and system types that I can interrogate for either misconfigurations, vulnerabilities, and then of course compliance, which we're going to dive pretty deeply into. Now, the ability to again see these assets and really drill into how what shape they're in when it comes to vulnerability concerns, when it comes to misconfiguration concerns, pretty quick and easy to drill in. Understand what policies are assigned, because these policies are the lifeblood of the compliance checks that we're ultimately performing. They serve as the benchmarks and the ultimately how we're collecting evidence against our environment. So, these policies really form the basis of that type of analysis. And the checks inside of these policies, right, again, very focused in on the system type we're dealing with here. So we're looking at a server instance, but what about when we are looking at a container instance? What if we are looking at an AWS service? So each of them have their own considerations, and I'll explain why that's so topical, right, during a compliance audit. And then, of course, if this case I have a system that's been fully patched, but in the case of systems that are vulnerable, this gets highlighted here as well. Now, the assessments that we're performing against all of these assets, though, they're not just applied against the runtime. They're not just looked at on what I think of as like what's on the shop floor, what's out there. We also, this analysis that you're looking at here, we also provide and execute this against your complete sort of release lifecycle. So there's a link here for CI/CD on the left side of my UI, and when I drill in, I have this bird's eye view of all the different pipelines that are out there, which I am able to check for misconfigurations and check for compliance concerns. So these are like just a few sample, pipelines that I'm monitoring right now. And GitHub is a great example of, an environment that many of our developers, use globally, frankly. But when we're looking at the type of releases that we perform in our environments, this is an example of a release that we have moving from stage to stage. We are using Terraform under the hood, but really we're releasing against Okta here, right? So we're configuring one of our SaaS providers. Well, Mondoo is able to assess during each stage in the release process the critical functions or security settings rather within Okta. These functions or these settings rather, they impact how we achieve compliance, right? They impact contractual requirements we might even have down the road. So the point here being that we actually measure this stuff end to end. So let's dig into compliance as sort of promise, right? When we look at the Compliance Hub landing page here, this view, really what you're seeing is that we're automatically measuring you against a series of frameworks, and progress against one framework like SOC 2 will actually net you sort of a down payment or progress against other frameworks like HIPAA or PCI. And that's because these frameworks, they have overlap, right? The benchmarks we're using to evidence against or achieve certain controls, they overlap. And so one of the most powerful ways of saving on time and labor is, hey, where are those overlaps? Can't we just leverage the same findings? Absolutely. We do this automatically with the mapping we've done under the hood. So if I just drill into, I just created this framework here. I just called it CIS controls. This example framework is actually very interesting because it has some of the most common titling and criteria that most of the frameworks will look for. There's a lot of compliance frameworks out there talking about encrypting sensitive data at rest. Well, what does that actually mean? So if I drill into this control, what happens is if I need to achieve encrypt, how do I evidence against encrypting sensitive data at rest? Well, if I'm dealing with an environment with an absolute heterogeneous collection of assets, between what I have in AWS, what I have in GCP, maybe some operating systems, some containers. These are all systems that are considered in scope. Well, what's happening here is Mondo is automatically crossing across all of these services and systems and is bubbling up this information, producing this analysis, and giving us an idea of how we stack up. In the end, this is the evidence we're producing to satisfy our auditors. This is what we need to do. That's sort of asking these heterogeneous questions, if you will, across our environment for everything that's in scope, right? If I need to collect audit logs in GCP, that means I have to go dig into various very GCP specific settings to answer that question. In addition, if I have to do this against my Azure environment, my endpoints, my SaaS services, again and again, these types of assets are absolutely, these evidentiary assets are what help us automate and get out of this situation where we're performing these steps manually and in a time-consuming fashion, right? And pulling our engineering teams off of that work that they could be doing, so delivering value to customers.
Thanks for that, Daniel. We're definitely scratching the surface at all this possible with Mondoo, but this is really all the time we have for today. We have some other webinars planned for the future, and in that we'll dive into some of the other capabilities of the platform. But to summarize what we covered today, compliance is a business problem that helps us to unlock revenue by allowing us to work with other businesses that require their vendors to be compliant. Compliance is a problem for all types of businesses at any stage. Mondoo is a security and compliance platform that provides real-time asset inventory, security and risk management, and continuously collects evidence across a wide array of technologies. Daniel and I are going to stick around, happy to answer any questions that any of the webinar participants have. And until next time, thank you very much.